Hey, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Life Whispers podcast. Viviana, your host here. And I'm so excited for this interview, not only because I think it was about time that I did an all English episode, but also because our guest is incredible. Before I introduce you to Rick, I want to dedicate this episode to everyone that has served our country. I think it's no coincidence well, it is a coincidence, but let's say that there are no coincidences in this life. That Memorial Day was yesterday. We will publish this as we normally do a little later than, of course, the time that we're recording, but today's Tuesday. Yesterday was Memorial Day. And I just want to thank everyone and everyone's families of people that have served in all areas of the military for our country, because honestly, it means so much to all of us. And this is a positive story, but we know it's not always the case. So I just want to make sure I put that out there. And now I'm so excited to welcome Rick. Rick, welcome to the Life Whispers podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Viviana. It's an amazing opportunity and honor to be with you today.
Thank you so much. So I want to start off by telling a little story. Yesterday, it was a day off. I was in my couch looking on Netflix what to watch. And I ended up choosing a documentary on the volcano that erupted in, I think it was Wakari is the name of the volcano in New Zealand. And this was a few years ago. I think it was like 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a really good documentary. I recommend people watch it if they have no idea, because I had no idea about this eruption. Throughout the whole documentary, we're listening to what went on that day. And well, there were around 40 something people that went on this island near New Zealand. Well, it's part of New Zealand, but it's like a separate island. And they were going to see a volcano that is the most active volcano, I think, in New Zealand, or I don't even know if in the world. They went on an adventure. So you had a lot of people that were looking for adventure because they love to skydive and do all these crazy things, but there were some people that were just doing like a normal tour that they chose from a list in a cruise. They do those shore excursions. And when they were on the island, the volcano erupted, and it was a huge tragedy for everyone in the island. And some people were lucky to come out alive, some people were not. But it was very interesting because the people that did come out alive had two completely different perspectives. Just listening to the way they told the story, to the way they've been able to recover from that day, really made me think how we are all wired differently to overcome adversity. And I think it's so admirable whenever we bump into people that are able to see these experiences in the best light. Again, no coincidences that we had this episode today, because now I get to sit in front of you and actually ask you so many questions regarding that perspective, right? Because I always say that there's two ways to look at adversity, whether it's from a gratitude perspective or from a victim perspective. And whenever I come across someone that chooses the gratitude perspective, I really want to dig deep and understand where that mindset comes from, because I think it's definitely the one we should all access. Anyway, spoke too much, but all this to let you know kind of all these questions that I want to get deeper into. So the first thing that I want to do, Rick, is get to know you a little bit better, and everyone that's listening to us. Where are you from? And what I do in the Life Whispers podcast is we try to go back to little Rick, right? And get to know a little bit of those traits that made you when you were a child, personality, and just to kind of understand how the path has been from there on. So take us a little bit back and let's get to know young Rick, or younger Rick, because I know you're super young.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm no longer young Rick, that's for sure. I'm now 40, so I don't feel that young Rick anymore. But yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York, a place called Windsor, New York, and I was really involved with a lot of athletics. I did a lot of sports. So many different types of sports. Like we did baseball, we did wrestling, we did football, we did canoeing and kayaking, we did snowshoeing, in cross country ski, whatever we could do, we did. So I was out and about doing a lot of stuff. I lived outside, and I know it's a different time today, but like when we were bored back then it was get out of the house, go do something. And we didn't know what to do, but we would do something. So a lot of time spent in the woods, a lot of time hanging out at a friend's house up and down the road, and but a lot of athletics, and I loved sports. I really did love sports. And honestly, I think about like future Rick from young Rick. The guy that graduated high school probably wouldn't have graduated high school without sports. So
Yeah.
thankfully, I had sports under my belt to keep me on track.
Yeah, I was listening to some other interviews you've done, and you mentioned that school was like not your jam. Like you're like, this is not for me. Tell us a little bit about that because I kind of relate to you.
Well, I do not have very many regrets in my life, and that is one of them. Um, just because I could have done so much better in school. And the reason it's a regret is because I know I could have done better and I didn't do better. And, looking back on it, it frustrates me. I don't know. I knew I would graduate. I knew that. And I knew I would get past, but it didn't matter how good I did as long as I did. And it was
Yeah.
just barely get by. And yeah, I really believed that like this magical thing would happen when I graduated, where I would all of a sudden have ambition. Like I thought
Yeah.
that would happen. Like, oh, you're gonna get your diploma, and that diploma is gonna give you ambition. That's what comes with a diploma, and that's
Yeah.
not what happens at all. So
Not
the
the
same Rick
case.
that was in high school was the same Rick after high school for quite a while. Just barely get by. Do what you do, to make enough money to live and pay your bills.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think obviously like education is the key to so many opportunities and just in general we're obviously encouraging people to continue their education, but I do agree that there's some different personalities and school I that's another whole topic that I think when you're a kid you don't understand it and you're looking for something that fits your interest in the moment, and if you don't have the attention span and you're not interested you just block it completely, but as you
Right.
keep growing you're like, I mean, I should have tried a little harder, you know?
Yeah, and it's not even about education. It was like, I look at it now, it's not even the education part. It's like I was going to school, so why not do as good as I can at it? Like that's the way
Yeah.
I look at it now. And if I'm going to do something, whether it's continue your education after high school or it's going into a trade or doing a sport that you love, like why not? If that's what you're going to do it all the way.
Yeah.
So even after I graduated and I went into the workforce, I really was just doing enough to get by. I wasn't looking for any kind of job that was really going to sustain me for the rest of my life. That's not. But what I do now is when I'm doing something, I'm putting my all into it. That's what I'm
Yeah.
doing. I might as well put my all into it and have everybody else get as much as they can out of it as well.
I love it. No, and look at everything that you've done that we're obviously going to continue talking about. But I understand, and at the moment, which because of different stories about you that I've heard, we had this. Well, you had this kind of in question about what's my purpose and trying to really connect to something. And I believe you mentioned something about seeing a story of someone who had passed away and how that impacted you. And I think it's interesting because when we graduate from school, our careers become our purpose, right? We kind of graduate and the ambition is the career. And obviously there's so much more to life than just the career. But when you're a kid, you don't really understand that.
Yeah.
In your case, you didn't really have like a career focus, but you did end up being inspired by someone. So tell us a little bit of how that led you to join the military and then find a purpose in some other area.
Yeah, I would say that I really didn't have much of a purpose before I joined. And, maybe my purpose was just being a son, to my mom and my dad and, a brother to my younger brothers. But I don't even know if I was doing a very good job at those things. So I didn't really have much of a purpose. And that's just it. I needed a purpose. Like we all need purpose in life. We all need a significance in who we are. And I needed that. So I can remember I was playing with the idea of the military, but I wasn't really sure about it. But I was at my grandmother's house in 2004, and on her coffee table, our local newspaper was there, and it was sitting face up, headline front page read, Sydney grad killed in Iraq. And Sydney is a small town that's just about two towns over from where I lived. And when I read the headline, I thought, maybe I know the soldier. And when I looked down at the picture, there was a picture right under the headline, and it was a picture of someone I did know, Isaac Nieves. And Isaac was a wrestler from Sydney, and I wrestled for Windsor. And when you wrestle for two small towns that are that close to each other, you just know each other.
Yeah.
Wrestling is a tight community, and you spend entire days together, and it's a tough sport, and you just get to know everybody. So I knew Isaac, and when I saw his picture and then I read the article, that was when I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm wrestling with this idea of the military. This is the tipping point. I needed it because I saw what he gave, talking about Memorial Day. I mean, what is Memorial Day? It's to honor those that we've lost in battle. And Isaac was one of those men that was lost in battle. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing nothing for anyone. Like, how am I making myself better? Or how can I make anyone else better if I can't make myself better? So
Mhm.
when I read that and realized what he gave up for me and for us, and I realized that I needed to do something different. And the day after I read that article is the day that I went to the recruiter station for the
Wow.
final time and said, let's sign up. And I signed those papers to join the military.
Wow. It's crazy how certain things happen at the precise moment they need to happen,
Yeah,
because
I had been talking military, and then all of a sudden I read that article. I can remember. How often do you remember a headline on a specific day from a newspaper? I mean, September 11th is one that everybody can remember, but like for me, I can remember that specifically. I can still picture the front page because it was the Easter Sunday paper. So there was something with like a cathedral up in the top left with the Catholic Church, and I just remember it. And
wow.
yeah, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
Wow. And I think there's like this interesting parallel of how looking for purpose led you to the military and then how that experience has brought you to a new purpose. So tell us a little bit about how you get into the military, because obviously you're looking for that purpose, the tipping point comes, you sign up. So that means you were extremely ready for that moment. When you get there, is it challenging? Are you questioning what am I doing here? Or do you continue this excitement through? How long were you in the military for, and how was that process?
I questioned everything.
Yeah.
I questioned everything when I got there. I knew it was going to be difficult. And, like I said, I was an athlete in high school. And, when I went in, it was almost 4 years after I got out of high school. So, I didn't really continue to work out after high school. So I wasn't in the best shape of my life when I got there. But what the physical part wasn't that hard. I figured that out very quickly. I got into shape very quickly. The mental part was extremely difficult for me. Yeah, I was now 21 years old, and actually, I was one of the older guys there. Most of the guys, it's hard to say, 17 or 18 years old. And most of them could not care less about getting anyone else in trouble. And that was so frustrating for me because, they're 17 years old. I remember what I was like at 17. I didn't care either. And they were there and they knew that if they got in trouble, it wasn't just them getting in trouble, it was everybody getting in trouble.
Yeah.
So those were the things that I questioned. And I can remember one day the drill sergeants coming into we were like, I don't know, 7 weeks in. We had like 2 weeks left of actual the basic training part before we went to our job training. And he came in and he said, you all have to start over. Like start over 7 weeks. And he said, we just got a paper in the mail that said that we weren't trained enough to be your drill sergeants and you have to start over. And everyone panicked and freaked out. And the drill sergeants left the room, and it was bad. Like people were ready to go because they're like, I'm not doing this again.
No, yeah, no.
And then they came back in and were like, we're just kidding with you guys. They were
Oh
messing
my
with us.
God.
But that was just the mental games that they played. I mean, honestly, that was one of
Wow.
the toughest ones, realizing that we were going to have to do that over
All
again for
over
7 weeks.
again.
Now, we all talked a big game and said, oh, that's it, we're done. Every single one of us would have went through that 7 weeks again.
Yeah.
That's just how that works. but yeah, it was very difficult mentally. Physically it wasn't that hard, but mentally it was tough. And once I got through that though, and once I got to my job, I loved it. And you know,
Yeah.
I look back today and I love basic training too. At the time it was really difficult, but you know, we talk about adversity, what adversity is, and difficulties and misfortune. Yeah, it felt like it was very difficult and it felt like misfortune at that time. But
Hmm.
I've also learned in my life that adversity is amazing. Like, we don't ask for it, we don't want it, but when it comes, we got to get through it. And when we get through it, we come out better. That's the way I look
Yeah.
at it now. And I see that as part of the basic training experience.
Wow. Whew, that's a big one to swallow though, because it's definitely a hindsight is 2020 kind of thing. And when you're going through it, it's so hard to see the end of the tunnel and be like, I'm eventually going to appreciate this. This is making me stronger. In the moment, it's impossible.
You
It's
don't
so
see it.
hard.
Yeah,
You
you don't feel
don't.
that. You don't see the possibilities that, you know, with Sweethearts and Heroes, the group I speak with, we talk a lot about hope. And HOPE stands for hold on, possibilities exist. You know, that's really hard to do when you don't truly know what those possibilities that exist are.
Yeah,
But the possibilities are amazing, and you have to hold on to find out what they are. Like, I wouldn't be talking to you right now if I had given up along the way. So, yeah,
that's so
adversity, it
true.
stinks when we're going through it, but man, when we get through it, we come out stronger. I
I
believe that
agree.
we can come out stronger. I don't think that's always the case if we don't look at it that way.
I agree. Perspective is absolutely everything.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then you're technically going through this process. You would have done it again. So that means in the moment, regardless, you would have chosen to stay there. You're connecting to something. Once you mentioned you once you got to the job, you loved it. What was the job? What were you doing exactly?
So I got to my unit in Fort Hood, Texas. I was with the 4th Infantry Division, 122 Infantry. That was my unit. And, you know, that's where you get to start really building relationships with the guys. Like, basic training is, it's tough to build the relationships there. You know, you're going to be there only for a short time. It's hard. Some of the guys you just do not like. You build some relationships. But when I got to my unit in Fort Hood, you build a relationship with everybody, because you know eventually you're going to war with them.
Yeah,
And you better have a good relationship with them, because they're going to be there when it's life or death situations. So
literally.
I started building those relationships with those guys, and I became a Bradley driver. That was my first job. And, you know, when I was in basic training, I can remember that when we started training on the Bradley in basic, just the first idea of what a Bradley is. And when they introduced it to us, the drill sergeants introduced it as the rolling coffin. That was the nickname for it,
Oh
right?
my God.
Yeah. So when I got to Fort Hood, Texas, and they were like, "Here's your Bradley," I was like, "Oh, great!"
Thank
And
you. Thank you
yeah,
for
there,
this.
40 guys in our platoon and only 3 Bradleys, and I get one. So yeah, and the reason they called them that is because if they were ever hit with an explosion, you usually didn't get out of them. Just like
Wow.
a coffin, you know, when a coffin's closed, you don't get out, and that's it. That was the idea. So, but I loved the Bradley when I first started training on it, and you know, even today, I still love it. There's a relationship I have with the vehicle as well. Like, I knew it inside and out. I knew how to run it. I knew how to fix most of the things with it. It was mine. So I became a driver, and then you know, trained in Fort Hood for a year, getting ready to deploy. And we knew we were going, and I don't know if I really knew what I was in for, um, until the day that, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks before we deployed. My command sergeant major, he pulled everybody together to have that little rah rah talk about the reality of what's happening. And um, he said probably one of the most important things I've ever heard anybody say to me, or to everyone that was there. And he looked at everybody, and what he said was, "You're not all coming home."
Wow.
But that
Which
was the
is,
honest truth.
do you even believe it's true? Like in the moment, do
you
you
you know
realize it?
like you know you're going to war. And you know, it was 2006 at that point, or 2005 at that point. So the war had been going on for a few years in Afghanistan, and you know, a few years in Iraq. And we knew that, like, there's the possibilities. But when your command sergeant major comes up and you're sitting in the in a formation, and he tells you that, that's when it becomes extremely real. And
Yeah.
I lost a good friend that day that I was injured. And since he was in my vehicle, like he was a part of my Bradley, he was probably sitting right next to me that day that the command sergeant major said that you're not all coming home.
Wow.
And that's just how. But you know what? Sometimes it's hard to hear the truth, but we have to hear the truth. We had to be more prepared than just, hey, we're going to war, see you when we get home. Hey, we're going to war. I hope I make it home. Like we got to know the reality of it and really let it sink in. So I think it was a very important conversation. Again, it's a conversation I'll never forget that I had.
Wow. Yeah. That's tough. I mean, obviously, it's what you're saying. You know there is a possibility of that happening. There is this, I don't know if it's like a human instinct or what it is, but you always default to thinking that's not going to happen to me.
Mhm. Especially when
And
you're 21, 22, invincible.
exactly, invincible, literally. So when you get to Iraq and you start operating the Bradley, do you think you at that moment you're just taking this operation and running with it, or you're a little bit anxious, worried? Like, what are you feeling emotionally? Or do you just become this, like, I don't know, super rational kind of human, not so much
Well,
emotion?
I'll tell you at first, I mean, it hits you right away when you get there.
Yeah.
Like the whole like you're not all coming home thing. I can remember. So we started out. We got to Kuwait. Kuwait is kind of just like the staging grounds where you get ready to go to Iraq, and we drove into Iraq. And I remember we got to where we were going to stay in Iraq, and there was the next day we got handed a little like bifold, and it was a memorial service that was going to be held that day for a soldier who died a couple days before. And it was the first day I was there. Was somebody handing
Welcome.
me a bifold saying, here's this memorial service, and there it is. There's the reality of it. Like, not only are you not coming home, not all coming home, the first day you're there, there's a memorial service. So that was when reality set in. So when we first started going out on missions and the people who had a strong faith, they'd pray every day. Even the people that didn't have a strong faith, they would pray with the people in the vehicles because that's what you did. And but that was the beginning. That was the beginning. And then 7 or 8 months in, you just kind of grow numb to it all, and you just hop in your vehicle and you go out on your mission. It's a lot different than it was day one. So I don't know, complacent is probably the right word in some senses, but growing numb to it is another way to say it. Yeah, you just kind of got used to the things that would happen. Kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
Another day on the job.
It was.
Wow. That's, yeah, that's definitely another reason to admire everyone that serves our country. So tell us a little bit about the day of and what exactly happened.
Yeah, so a day like every other day, 9 months into the deployment, I had gone home on leave. A couple months before that, I got to go home on R&R for 2 weeks, and a couple months after that, I get back, and or sorry, a couple weeks after being home, I get back, and a couple months after that, I was out on a patrol, September 1st, 2006. And just like every other day, got into the vehicle and loaded up with my buddies, Sergeant Montez, who was our Bradley commander, and Specialist Lowe, who was our driver that day. And I had actually just moved up to being a gunner in the vehicle, and Lowe and I would switch once in a while. And we were out on a patrol. We were 5 vehicles in our convoy, 3 Humvees and 2 Bradleys. We were the 5th vehicle. So as a 5th vehicle, you're the rear security, which means you're looking backwards, which also means all you can see is the dust that's being kicked up from all the other
Mhm.
vehicles. So
Yeah.
not a great position to be in. You don't really like being back there. You can't see much. So we moved up. We had actually asked the other Bradley to move up. We moved up one position to the 4th vehicle, and about 2 minutes later, our vehicle was hit with that IED, improvised
Wow.
explosive device, and really just a bomb that was never intended to be buried, but it was still a bomb. And they had buried it to explode under our vehicle, and it exploded. It went through the bottom of my vehicle into the turret where I was sitting. Biggest problem with that is also in the turret where I was sitting is where our fuel tank is. and it hit the fuel tank, covering myself, my
Mm,
buddies who were in the vehicle with me, and the vehicle in fuel. And instantly, we were all on fire.
yeah.
And I knew the first thing that I had to do if I was going to survive was get out. I mean, in that moment, you can't think of anything else. I don't. Doesn't matter what's going to happen in 5 minutes. It doesn't matter what's going to happen in 10 minutes or tomorrow or the week after. There is no 5 minutes later if you don't get out of the vehicle. So I
Yeah.
had to get out. Every day that I climbed in, I would close the hatch above me because I'd climb in from the top. And that day that I climbed in, I did not close the hatch, which is a blessing because if I did, there's no way I would have found the lever above my head with the chaos of the moment, with all that smoke and fire. I wouldn't have found it, so I wouldn't have gotten out. But thankfully, I left the hatch open, and
Wow.
I climbed out, got to the top. Next thing I knew I had to do to survive was get off of the vehicle, and that's what I had to do. So I jumped, and the problem was that it's 10 feet off of the ground, so that was a big problem. And the other problem was I couldn't
Yeah.
see. I couldn't see because my face was on fire and the
Was on
fire was
fire.
covering my eyes. But I had to
Wow.
jump. It didn't matter if I could see or not. I had
Yeah.
to take, the whole saying of leap of faith. This was a true leap of faith. Just leap and hope I make it to the ground safely. Well, I did that and I made it to the ground, but not safely because I landed. And when I landed, I broke my leg because I couldn't see the ground. So I
Yeah.
broke my leg and I severed an artery in my leg below my knee. And that ended up in an amputation of my right leg below my knee. So
Wow.
yeah, but now I'm on the ground. So I got the two steps done. I got out of the
Hmm.
vehicle, I got off of the vehicle. Now I got to get the fire out and stop, drop, and roll is what we were all taught to do. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
But it didn't work because I had too much fire on me, too much
Yeah.
fuel. It was not happening. So that's when I felt my first real hopelessness in my life. I think I've struggled with hope before in my life because I think we all struggle with hope in our life at some point. But I think this is the first point in my life that I ever felt hopeless because that's when I laid on my back and I just looked up into the sky and I gave up. Like I accepted that I would die in that moment. I didn't know what else to do. Like I just rolled, but couldn't put the fire out. I couldn't run. My leg was broken, and even if I could run, where was I going? I couldn't see because my face was on fire. So, biggest regret of my life is giving up that day because I just know today that I will struggle again in the future. There's going to be a time where I struggle, where I lose somebody close to me, or something really difficult happens to me, and I will never give up. I don't care how difficult it is. I don't care if it's my last day on this earth. I'm not giving up until it's my last breath. And, I fought till the end. I just know that I will never do that again. So I laid there on my back, stared up in the sky, and I gave up. But eventually I rolled in one direction, thank God. And I ended up, and I say thank God because I do believe that that's how I ended up in the canal that was there. There was a canal there
Oh, wow.
yeah, that I did not know was there. And it was enough water, only enough water to put the fire out, not enough water to drown in, just enough to put the fire out. Saved my life.
Wow.
Saved my life. Yeah.
That is incredible. I mean, I was thinking of I go very like deep, which is the reason I have this podcast. I love questioning deep topics. And I was talking to my boyfriend. I was like, what do you think in the volcano situation? Because there was a guy that was running, even though his skin was like, because it was steam. So he was being burnt, but it wasn't fire per se. And his skin was coming out and he just kept running. And I was asking him, I was like, do you think you would have crawled and been like, that's it? Or do you think you run? And I think adrenaline has so much to do with that. I don't know how much is adrenaline and how much is real hopelessness or hopefulness. What
Right.
do you think? I know you have the regrets today, but at that moment, do you think like what did you experience? Because it's hard to know. You can't see, you don't know what to do, you don't know where you are, you're on fire. I mean, it's a hard situation to find alternatives.
Right. I mean, so I think about that and, adrenaline, will to live. Like, I don't think I would have gotten out of the Bradley if I didn't have a will to live, or I don't think I would have jumped off the Bradley if I didn't have a will to live, and I don't think I even would have tried to stop, drop, and roll without that will. When those didn't work, and I knew that I had seconds to live. I actually have never really thought about that. I think about it right now, like I had seconds to get that fire out. And if I didn't get that fire out in just a few more seconds, I certainly wouldn't be here today. But in that moment of like all those things before I had that will, and when I did all those things and it felt like it didn't work in the end, I couldn't put the fire out. I think the fact that it was just a few more seconds was like, well, there's nothing else you can do.
Yeah.
And when I say that I rolled into that canal and I talk about faith and like I struggle with faith. Faith is something that I have always struggled with. I love God and I love Jesus, but I struggle with it all. I still do. But to this day, that day, there's no way I didn't end up in that canal because of a higher being.
Right.
There's just
Yeah.
no way in my and that I can even think about that. And I watched that documentary that you're talking about, and I watch those people, and I look at them the same way you do. Like it's amazing. It's amazing what they did, and and I don't ever put myself in that same category. Like I don't know, I have a hard time with that. And I don't think they probably do this themselves. I don't think anyone has ever said they are amazing because of what they got through. But I watch them as amazing, like him running through that and running past the people who are gone, and the husband and wife. It's and after I watched that, I wanted to reach out to a few of them. I really did. I did not reach out to any of them, but they were burned. And I actually have some friends who were in the Navy who were burned very badly from steam. They had a boiler explode in their submarine tender, and they were burned very, very badly. I can't remember exactly, but I believe there was 7 of them that were burned, and I think 3 of them that passed away. The other 4 survived, but they were very badly burned. And I can remember the people in the hospital said that steam burns are just different, and they're a lot more difficult to deal with, a lot more pain involved. But yeah, so you mentioned adrenaline. The adrenaline that I had, I actually didn't feel the fire. I did not feel the fire. I knew I was on fire, and I knew I had broken my leg. I could feel the pain from that, but the pain from my the burns, I could not feel.
Wow.
I could not feel those the burns, and whole different story from the hospital. I felt them there, but that day that I was in that fire and on fire, I didn't feel any of that pain right there. Pretty crazy to think about.
So yeah, at the end of the day, it comes down to you did step 1, you did step 3, you did step 4, like, and you got to a point where you're like, none of this is working. Then it's when you give up. So you basically launch on adrenaline. You look for alternatives based on will, and at the end, you just said, what else am I gonna do? And then faith kind of just stepped in. That's an interesting evolution to
it
the
is.
steps.
Yeah, and my buddies, none of them thought I got out of the vehicle. They all thought I was still in the vehicle. There was fire everywhere, so they couldn't really they could not see where I was or where the Bradley was. They didn't see me at all. They thought I never got out of the vehicle. Until 2 of my buddies heard me yelling. And that's when they found me in the canal.
In the canal. Wow. That's incredible. And at that moment, so do you lose consciousness? You wake up later? When is the moment where you're, realizing you're safe, but look at what happened?
So I thought I remembered everything from that moment. Cause I tell you, the story I tell you right now that's all from my memory. But there were parts that I didn't remember. I was told later on by my lieutenant that I kept repeating over and over and over. Once they got me out of the canal, waiting for the helicopter, over and over and over, I just kept saying, "Don't let me go into shock. Don't let me go into shock. Don't let me go into shock." And he said, I probably said it 1,000 times.
Wow. What did that mean?
I don't
Don't
know.
let me go.
I don't even, I mean, I know we learned about shock, and we learned that in basic training, like the very basics of it. I don't really know a whole lot about shock, but I know it's not good. And I know I didn't want to be in it. But I don't remember saying it. So I was probably already in shock when I
Yeah.
was saying that. But I can remember one thing that they always said in basic training was and I can't remember this exactly, but like you're not supposed to give water to either a burn victim or somebody going into shock. I cannot remember exactly, but I think that's because I can remember somebody offering me water,
You're like,
and
no.
I was like, no, 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 and they're like, okay, let me just wet your lips. So they took like a wet T-shirt, took their shirt off, dipped it in some water, and you know what? But I remember that from basic training, like you're not supposed to. So I think that was part of it. Like I didn't want to go into shock, and I might have been going into shock, and I didn't want to drink water, and I
Yeah.
remember that, but I don't remember me saying that over and over. I do remember getting to a hospital. I remember them taking me out on a stretcher. I remember them taking me through two doors, and I remember a light above my head, and that's it. The light
That's
from
it.
the operating room or wherever they were taking me, and then a female nurse stuck a needle in my arm, and that was game over for weeks.
A while. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do they induce you in a coma so that you're while you're
they did.
recovering?
Yep, they did. Just so I wasn't dealing with the pain and stuff like that in the early process of the surgeries and all that.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, no, it's definitely, they say that burns, that's just one of the most painful experiences you can have, especially. So it's your face. Is it also basically every area of your
Six
body?
60%. So
Wow.
I lost my right leg. So the main portions that weren't burned is my chest and my back. So that being the biggest part of your percentage of your body, that's the 40% that was not burned was my chest and my back. And if so, I was wearing a like a bulletproof vest. They called them IBAS, and the IBAS saved my life. If I wasn't
Wow.
wearing that, many things saved my life that day. Many little pieces of that puzzle came together. But if I wasn't wearing that vest, I'd be 100% burned, and you don't survive that. So
Yeah.
thankfully, I had that vest on, and yeah, so 60% of my body, and they say the burns are the most painful. I'm telling you right now that the hospital stay was brutal.
Yeah.
When you wake up from that coma, and again, so here's the physical and mental thing again, kind of like basic training. Like, yeah, physically it was really tough, but mentally it was extremely tough, especially like you're on a floor with other guys who were burned as well. It's a burn unit, and most of them are military. There's some really hardcore military guys in that on that floor. There's Navy SEALs in there. There's Marine Recon in there. There's really tough people on that floor, and um, all the screams sound the same when you're on that floor. It doesn't matter what branch you are. It doesn't matter what your job is, and that was hard. When you go into the shower, because they
Ooh,
take you into the shower,
I
and
can't even imagine that.
you can hear the screams from the other guys. It was extremely difficult. So physically, yeah, sure, it was tough, but the mental part was is for certain tougher.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's also that realization. So if you recall, like that moment when you look at yourself, and I'm sure did the amputation come immediately, or was it something that happened
Pretty
later?
close. It was like 6 days after. They
Okay.
tried to save my leg. They took a vein out of my left leg, tried to replace the artery, and it just didn't work. And I think it was one of those things that my parents had to make the choice. And my life was still very much in doubt. And I think they had to make the choice to either, eliminate the leg, eliminate the issue, one of the issues, so that we can concentrate on his life. And they said, you know what, if that's really the case, then get rid of that problem
Yeah.
and start focusing on his life. So yeah, they amputated. I think it was about 6 days later,
Okay.
after my injury. Thankfully, it was
Yeah.
that soon after my injury.
Yeah. So you didn't also have to have like this very elongated time period of
No,
suffering.
I have a friend who called me the other day. It's been almost 17 years since my injury, so his was about 17 years ago too, and he's about to have his leg amputated.
Yeah,
17 years later.
that's rough.
It
So
is.
I recently did an episode with another fellow podcaster, and we were talking about when you lose certain things and how they take you to appreciate. And so our examples, we have a very hoarse voice, and our passion is very well connected to communicating. And we have been told that we might lose our voice as a possible permanent thing. And it really, obviously, I'm not comparing what you're going through at all
I
with
love your
this.
voice, by the way.
I thank you.
I do. I do. It's noticeable. It's different. I love it. But it
Thank
does think that
you.
you have that possibility in there.
Yeah, and it can be painful and
Sure.
annoying and unpredictable. And we were talking
Sure.
about how that moment that you lose something, that you need to do something that you connect to, is a very hard moment. I want to, connect with you in that sense of, in that moment when like you look at yourself and you, first of all, I'm sure you have to go through the experience of recognizing your new face as yourself, which I'm sure is challenging. But you found your purpose in the military and you don't have your leg, and I'm sure that kind of disqualified the possibilities of going back. How is that, like, purpose crisis, identity crisis? How is that moment? Because I can only imagine how challenging that is.
Okay, so here is who I am a week before my injury. I'm sitting in a tent in Iraq, and I'm having a conversation with my friends, and we're having a conversation about getting injured because there was guys getting injured all the time. And I told my friends that if I ever lost my leg, I wanted them to shoot me. That was
Wow.
23, 24-year-old me who didn't believe, talking about what we're talking about right now. Like, I didn't believe that I could live my life without my leg. Like I told you, I'm a
You're an
soldier,
athlete, and you
right?
were
I'm an
also an athlete all
athlete,
your life.
right? And I'm not those things, or I believed I couldn't be because, those injuries that I was seeing happening with guys, they were losing legs and arms and they were in the hospital. They weren't in the recovery process where they were now playing wheelchair basketball and all those things. It was the bad part where they're in the hospital. And I was like, I don't want to go through that. Like, I don't want that. I lose who I am if I lose my leg. And
Wow. I've said that exact sentence. Like, if I lose my voice, I lose myself, literally.
and and Viviana, I think that's when you find yourself. I
Wow.
do. Like, I am so glad they didn't shoot me. That's for sure. Because like today I'm better than I was, and I don't have a leg, and these are my hands. That's it. That's all I can do with them. And I've been doing that for 17 years. And um, like I lost my nose and my ears and my hands and my leg and my hair, and I had beautiful hair. That's my biggest thing. I wish I could get that back. But I lost those things, and I don't regret saying that because that's just who I was at that time. But I am way better today than I ever was before. So I just had to find myself differently. And I don't know. I just love who I am. And I haven't said this yet to you, but what happened to me, I look at today as the best thing that ever happened to me. Now,
Wow.
I don't have to look at it that way.
No.
And but if I don't, then I'm not gonna find good things that came out of it. And the good things that came out of it are so many things. Like if I didn't get injured in Iraq, first, if I didn't join the military, and then if I didn't get injured in Iraq, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to talk to nearly 2 million students. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have my two daughters. Like all those things happened after my injury. And, if I wasn't injured, I'd probably still be in the army and I wouldn't have those other things happen to me. So, but I don't have to tie those things together. I choose to because if I don't find anything that's good that came out of that, then I'm not talking to 2 million students. I'm not having this conversation with you right now. I'm not married to my wife. I don't have my two daughters. Like, yes, it was because I was injured, but then it was because I decided to take what happened to me and find something really awesome that came out of it. And that's just how I look at my life today. I will deal with difficult things again, and it will be a struggle, but I know that I will get through it and that amazing things will come from it eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Wow. This is incredible. I always say my podcast is also my therapist. This is an incredible
Hey, I'm with you. I'm
conversation.
with you. This is therapy.
Wow. This is therapy. It's impressive, admirable, inspiring. It's everything Eh, I'm having a moment. And I do want to know how long it took you, because what we mentioned earlier is when you're going through the adversity, seeing this perspective is really out of reach for anyone who's listening to us that is going through whatever it may be, cancer, sickness, the death of someone, failure at a career, lack of purpose, whatever it might be. What can you tell them about your experience enduring the adversity in the moment when
Right.
finding perspective can be so challenging?
Yeah. So in the beginning, you had talked about, taking the mindset of like the victim or the person that overcomes that adversity. And, you know, um, I don't want anyone to be a victim. But there is this amount of time where you're allowed to be like, what the frick happened to me? Like, this sucks. Because in the moment of it happening, it does suck. And but you can't let that last too long. You certainly can't let it last forever. And I would tell you right now that when I got injured, it took too long for me. Um, but it's because I've never dealt with anything like this before. I never listened to things like this before, of people who were getting through things. I never listened to that. So, if you're listening right now, this is hopefully the turning point for you. Like, this is when you can realize, okay, not only did it happen, and yes, okay, I can understand that this is a good thing now. Okay, maybe it's a good thing. But you actually have to change how you're looking at the things that are going on around you. Start recognizing the things that are happening in your life that are good, that wouldn't be happening if that difficult thing that you are dealing with didn't happen. Like, I think about that. And now there are so when you are dealing with difficult things, it's really hard to clear the smoke and see the good things that even are right in front of you sometimes. You have to be able to clear away that smoke and see the good things that are there. And once you start seeing those good things, then you can start tying those things to the fact that, you know what? Hey, this difficult thing happened to me, and this amazing thing that's right in front of my face right now, that wouldn't be there if a difficult thing didn't happen to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like hearing that too, because at the moment, I think feeling is a part of the process, and being in pain and saying this fucking sucks.
Yeah, and you're
is
allowed to do that. You
Yeah.
absolutely are allowed to do that. Like, yeah, I love listening to all these some of these, well, not some, not all, but some these really hard people who are just like, get through it, you're gonna be fine,
Yeah.
dude. Let it suck for a second. Like, come on, man. I know, but you don't let it last too long, because that can take over. And I do understand that as well. You know what? I always tell when I'm talking to the kids in the classroom, when I do the little kids, or when I do like little sessions in the classrooms after our main speeches, and I talk about adversity, and the definition is difficulties and misfortune, and but I tell them my story and how it's the best thing that ever happened to me. So how does that still fit with adversity? Because that's not misfortune when I say it's the best thing that ever happened to me, but it's
Wow.
like the moment I was on fire. Was that misfortune? Absolutely. I wasn't thinking, wow, this is amazing. Like, wow, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. It had to suck for a little bit. And that's what makes it true adversity. But at some point, you have to shed the adversity part, because in the end, the definition is misfortune. And you've dealt with adversity. I hope that you can not continue to deal with that same adversity. Dealt with it, not deal with.
I love it. I wrote down this quote: "Let it suck for a second, just don't let it last too long." I
That's
think that's a
right.
great instruction.
Yeah, you're allowed to let it suck.
Yes, so true. So now I want to get a little bit into Sweethearts and Heroes and what you're doing with this project, this mission, this new purpose, I'm assuming, because I love the fact that you kind of gave a twist to it. I've talked to people that have faced some adversities, that not to this degree, but definitely similar to what you've been through. And the people that are dedicating themselves to public speaking or inspiring others, they tend to go to adults and to talking about adversity. And it doesn't sound like that's your audience or the message. I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing. And I would love for my future child to have the experience to talk to someone like you about that message. So tell me a little bit about why you end up going after kids Tell us a little bit about the message behind this new purpose.
So, so the easiest place to get into talk is a school. And, the first time I ever spoke was at my old high school. So that's the easiest place to get into is your old school.
Yeah.
I actually am kind of surprised they brought me back because of how terrible I did in school. And now they want me to talk to their students. Actually, funny thing is one of my first public speaking engagement, not my first, my maybe third ever was in my school. The first one I got was somebody got me and it was terrible and it was so terrifying. But I just went back to that school, my school, and spoke again last week. So that was
Wow.
it's 15 years, 16 years later. So it was amazing.
Wow.
But so that's where it started was just. But then, I was talking to kids in wrestling rooms because I was a wrestler, and
Yeah.
that's how Sweethearts and Heroes kind of got in because the guys that started Sweethearts and Heroes were also wrestlers, and they heard me talk and wanted me to be a part of it. And now I do it because, like my thing is talking about hope and hopelessness, and I'm so glad I'm not a teenager today in the world. Yeah, with the phones and with the social media.
Social media.
Yeah, and I'm 40 and I know I sound like the old guy right now, like, oh my gosh. So I don't think there's anything wrong with social media. I just don't think we don't know how to totally use it safely yet. We're still trying to figure all that out. And I'm just glad I'm not a teenager today who has to deal with that. But I know that there's outside of social media, that's not even a part of this conversation. There are a lot of kids who feel hopeless in this world, and that awful word that nobody likes to talk about, but suicide, and that number is way too high. In veterans, a lot of people know that number, 22 service members a day, they say, and
Wow.
there are too many students in schools that are attempting and succeeding in suicide as well, and it's because they're hopeless. I don't know what's led to that hopelessness. Like we talk about bullying in schools. Bullying might be a little tiny piece of that, but that's not even really our message. Our message is how to overcome that stuff, what you can do for other people. Like, yes, we need hope to get through things. H.O.P.E, hold on, possibilities exist. But we also have to recognize that we have hope that we can give to those people that are struggling. Like a little girl in my life who, well, I never knew who she was, 5, 6 years old, in a restaurant when I was struggling, when I got out of the hospital, when I was in my wheelchair, when I was all bandaged up, when I had extremely bad scarring on my face, open wounds. She came over, didn't come all the way over to my table because I could tell she was afraid. But when she got halfway over, I said something to her because I didn't want her to come all the way over. And I said, "Hey, how you doing?" Just as nicely as I could. And when I said that, she ran away from me. Like every kid did, and like every kid would. That's the way I saw it would happen. And when she ran away from me and she got back to her grandpa, she looked at him and she said, "Grandpa, he's really nice." And yeah, that's not what anybody thought she was going to say.
Wow. No.
But so here's the thing. The hope she gave me that day, she had no clue she carried it. Yeah, I don't care what you call it. I'm calling it hope. You can call it whatever you want. What she gave me that day changed my life forever. And you can't tell me that that's not something we all have that we can give to other people when they're struggling. Like that little girl didn't know what she was capable of, didn't even know what she did for me. She never will. She doesn't need to know because I know, and I'm still here because of that. And I'm doing what I'm doing today probably because of that. So that's my message. I'm not gonna train somebody who's 40 years old at that. Why not train somebody who's today we talked to some 5th and 6th graders who needed to know about that stuff. Like, what are you capable of? You can change people's lives. And when I talk to the older kids, it's beyond changing lives. It's also saving lives. That's the power that you carry. That's the power that we all carry. Hope.
I love that. I love that so much, especially because imagining about the girl, I did think like, oh, she's scared. Oh, she's thinking of all these judgments. And
So
it's
did I.
you saying to yourself the judgment that you like. It's your mind, the way it works.
Yeah.
You just create all these terrible scenarios and
Oh,
you
yeah.
judge yourself so bad.
I was dreading the fact that was going to be the life that I lived the rest of my life. Kids were always going to be afraid of me because they were at that point. And so that's the thing. When that happened, rainbows didn't shoot out of her and go hit
Yeah.
every child in the world.
Yeah.
When I went out in public, they're like, oh my gosh, there's Rick. He's so handsome. That's not how it worked. They were still afraid of me. But what changed was me. And now I could go up to a kid that I could tell is not sure and be like, hey, how you doing? Or just start talking to them. And then they're like, oh, that's not what I expected. And
Yeah.
today I talked to 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And when they first see me, when I walk in the room, they're like, oh my gosh. But as soon as I start talking, they're like, okay. And then by the end,
Oh,
they're like, I get it. He's just Rick.
yeah.
And that's who I want to be when I leave that school is I want to be just Rick.
I love it. And I agree. Definitely starting when they're young, you're going to be such an impactful figure in their lives and the way they build perspectives in the future. So I
That's
just,
right.
when I read that, I was like, what a perfect audience to have
Yes.
these
It is
conversations
perfect.
with.
Yes. Kids are the
Yeah,
best.
100%. So interesting, right? And I there's so many topics and I have the list down. But one of the topics that was in the email initially when we were in contact, it was finding love, right? I think there's so many people that listen to Life Whispers. We did a whole season on love and relationships. I would like just a few comments on how it was because when we are you were 21 and you're still young, but I think we connect our physical appearance to our self-worth, to love, right? This is something that we do naturally, completely mistaken, but it is the way, unfortunately,
Yes.
society kind of trains us. So how did this whole experience play a role in you finding your wife and creating your family? And what were some of, I don't know, something that looking back, you were like, well, this helped me kind of gain confidence or find my self-worth differently for anyone that's listening that could use a little bit of that motivation.
Well, I'm telling you right now. So today, the way I look right now, I am way more comfortable with the way I look today than I did 17 years ago before my injury.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
big
I
statement.
am. And it's because I've learned to love myself, and
Yeah.
this is who I am, and like there is nothing I can change about the way I look. So if I don't become comfortable with it, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. So I love the way I look, and I think when you love the way you look, it's easier to find love. Like when you're not confident and not comfortable with the way you look, then it's a lot harder to find it. So when I got on like some of the dating websites, Match, eHarmony, and I was using them. And I said I dated the same way on those that I dated in high school, though. Like if you didn't ask me out, it wasn't happening
Yeah.
because I'm a baby. I am. I'm a wimp. I have a hard
I feel
time.
you.
I don't like rejection. So it's easier just not to be rejected. So
Yeah.
on Match, I had my profile up, but I never checked it. I never got on unless somebody sent me something. And most of the time it was like, hey, I know who you are because in my area, everybody knows who I am just because of the way you can't miss me. When I'm walking around, you know who I am and you've heard my story. And so everybody would start the conversation with like, oh, I know who you are. Thank you for your service. And I was like, oh, here we go. Like, that's not really what I'm looking for. Um, and then Amy, my wife today, she sent me a message and mentioned nothing about the service. Obviously knew what I looked like because that's my profile picture. And she didn't say anything about my service. She just started talking. We just had a conversation. And the next day we started talking, and I'm like, do you know who I am at all? Like, and she's like, no. She's like, but I did go home and I talked to my dad about you, and my dad knew who you were, but she did not know who I was at all. And she had this conversation with me, and she was interested in me, not knowing anything about me.
I
Like
love that.
that was amazing to me.
And
Um,
refreshing, I can imagine.
yes, and you know what? So my wife has just never looked at me any different. And the first time I met her, like I had to walk up to her, then go like this, like, you do see me, right? You do see me, right? I hope you can see me because, like, are you blind? Like, if you are, it's okay. But she never saw me any different. And my daughter, my stepdaughter, Tenley, she was 3, almost 4 when we had met. She's never looked at me any different either. So she
Wow.
got that from her mom, and that's just amazing
That's
to me.
awesome.
But you know, when I was speaking in a seventh grade classroom, like I said, we do the presentations in big auditoriums with the schools, and then a lot of times I'll go in like tomorrow or today we did presentations all day. Tomorrow I'll go into the classrooms. We'll do some awesome connection stuff, Q&A. And this one little boy, seventh grader, asked me one day, he's like, "You met your wife after your injury?" And I was like, "Yeah, after." He's like, "After your injury?" And I'm like, "Yeah, after my injury." He's like, "Man, your spitting game must be fire." And I was like, "You're right, man. Like, she didn't marry me because I'm a handsomely good looking dude. Like, I gotta have but and it comes out of being
These kids.
comfortable. It's about being comfortable with who you are. And that's where
Yeah,
I think that's where that came from.
I love that. I love this so much. And it's true. I mean, it's this thing of like that parallel in your case because of your situation, but regardless, this is who you are, and embracing and loving what you got
Yeah,
is just such a huge part. And then finding someone that is just like your wife, I think, when you meet your match, it's just so special because you're like, this person cares. It's not because of scars of this, like they just like what they're seeing because they're seeing it from the perspective that it's supposed to be looked at.
that's
So
right.
I think it's super extra special, when you find these people.
Yep.
Um,
They're
I
out
love
there.
it.
They are.
They are. There's
But you
just a
can't
lot of, you have to be patient.
Yeah, and you can't just sit back. You got to do some work yourself as well. You can't just sit back and, just to hope and expect for things to happen. You got to make some effort, I could have made more effort. But if, I wouldn't have met Amy if I did. So it worked
Exactly.
out.
I love it. Wow, Rick, honestly, this interview has been incredible.
It
Definitely
has been.
top from all my seasons.
Well, thank
Um,
you.
I appreciate your time. I'm so inspired and I'm so excited to share this episode with everyone that follows the podcast.
Well, I truly appreciate you having me on, Viviana. It was amazing.
Yes, and thank you to everyone that has stuck around and listened to this incredible experience from Rick. I'm going to post all of his links, social media, everything I find, and resources so you guys can look more into everything that he shared because there's so many other interviews and incredible projects and things that he's doing. So I want to make sure that you guys don't miss out on anything. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Life Whispers podcast. See you on the next time.